By all appearances, Chris Aluka Berry is white, and that's only germane when you consider the thrust of his documentary photography, which he's devoted to telling the living stories of Black, migrant, and marginalized Appalachians. His intimate photos from within Black communities are only now collected in his first book, titled Affrilachia, Testimonies. More than 100 photos are interspersed with poetry, along with Aluka's personal observations through the 5 years he spent making photos in the pockets of Black communities in Western North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Tennessee. A handful of these photos are on view in the upstairs gallery of the Madison County Arts Council building in downtown Marshall. I'm Matt Peiken, the founding journalist of See Here, covering the arts of Western North Carolina. I spoke with Aluka on the floor of the exhibition. Aluka, thank you so much for joining me here today in this beautiful space at the Madison County Arts Council. You and I talked last week at the ribbon cutting. We had basically an interview conversation then, and you told me so many fascinating things, and I wished I was rolling tape then. But one of the things you told me before I want to get into your deeper backstory, you told me you have a Black father.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, people who are listening to this podcast only, you are very white appearing, every bit as white appearing as I am. Frizzy dark hair that goes down almost to your shoulders. Mm-hmm. You don't appear Black. You have a Black father. Tell me, how has that resonated with your experience in life when, at least outwardly, you don't appear Black? How has that punctuated your life?
It's kind of funny because sometimes I feel like I'm undercover. And it's interesting because in the Black communities, folks are used to, I can't tell you how many people I've met and they say, oh, I can see the Black in you. You look like my grandfather. You look like this person. So in the Black community, it's really well known, like all of these different shades. Now, of course, I do look white. But in the white community, a lot of folks know, unless you have certain characteristics, your hair is a certain way or something, then, oh, you must be white or you must be Italian or Greek or Latin, or people have thought I'm all kinds of things. But the beautiful thing is that I grew up in all Black neighborhoods. I grew up just steeped in Black culture. I didn't get exposed to white culture pretty much until high school. So rock and Guns N' Roses and all those things. I grew up listening to the Isley Brothers and Marvin Gaye and listening to Eddie Murphy and Richard Pryor and a lot of things that white folks did as well. But I grew up in a little small Black church. And yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've dated a white woman and had to educate them in all of these things that most white folks just aren't aware of when it comes to Black culture. So yeah, a lot of times I kind of feel like I'm undercover. But at the same time, I've experienced racism from both sides. So
well, let's get into that angle of it a little bit. You grew up in South Carolina, right?
I grew up in South Carolina.
What town?
I grew up in a little small town called St. Matthews, which is in Calhoun County, which is named after John C. Calhoun. A lot of racial tension there.
Did you perceive yourself as a minority in this, a racial minority in this community? Was it a Black majority community, or because you identified with a lot of Black culture, did you identify with being a racial minority from that perspective?
So actually, I'll back it up. Before we moved to St. Matthews, I lived in this town called Orangeburg. In Orangeburg, there are several HBCUs. Actually, my mom went to a HBCU.
Historically Black colleges and universities.
That's exactly right. And so I grew up on the South Carolina State University campus. I go into homecomings. I went to middle school there. So when we lived in Orangeburg, I pretty much was surrounded by Black communities and still experienced racial tension, going to summer camp and being the only guy that looks white. And me and my brother, but my brother looks Black, and we would be fighting literally back to back. So, but then when we moved to St. Matthews, it was very white and a lot of rebel flags and things like that. And people proud that their family are in the KKK or were in the KKK, and people calling me half-breed and all kinds of other terrible names that I could say.
So you felt, at least in pockets of your upbringing, not accepted by either the white or the Black community, right?
That's exactly right. No, being biracial, on paper, legally, so my birth certificate says my dad is Black. So legally, I'm Black, which is BS, right? This whole thing that if someone has any percentage of Black blood in them, that they're Black. And that goes back to white supremacy and all the things that make America not great. You know what I'm saying? So, but being biracial is its own thing. And when I get around other people that are biracial, I feel so much more at home because, yeah, you're in between. And even light-skinned black folks. I look white, but my brother, light-skinned black. Light-skinned black folks are judged heavily by dark-skinned black folks. Colorism, it's a heavy thing, even going back to slavery times. The slaves that were allowed to be in the house or out in the field. So this dynamic has existed for a long time.
How do you think that experience in your youth fed into your wanting to become a photographer? And you started out as a photojournalist. How do you think that upbringing fed into your want and your draw to photography?
I don't think my racial upbringing had much to do with me going into photography. First time I saw a camera, I was in middle school and it just looked like magic. But once I became a photographer and I worked at the state newspaper in Columbia, South Carolina for about 13 years, at one time was a really great newspaper for photography. Once I learned the power of photography and how we can see a picture of someone that doesn't look like us, doesn't sound like us, maybe doesn't even speak the same language as us, but we see ourselves in them through photography. We see it in someone going to church or someone loving their child or someone mourning the death of their loved one. Those universal things that we all can identify with. Giving a voice to underrepresented communities became very important to me, and things that flip racial stereotypes. That's where being raised biracial in the South kind of led me to this project, Affrilachia Testimonies. Just a way to change the way that we look at race in a small way.
Well, you've produced a lot of bodies of work before Affrilachia saw the light of day. What inspired you to step out of photojournalism and steep yourself more intimately and individually into some of these communities that you photographed over 10 plus years?
So when I was a photojournalist at the state newspaper, like you mentioned, I worked on several projects, a good number of projects where I would spend at least a year with people in communities.
And you got to do that while at the state?
That's right.
That's amazing. So that just harkens back to a yesteryear in photography. And in journalism, I've got to spend many months on stories and do other stories at the same time. But journalists rarely are afforded that kind of time now. And that's wonderful that you had that kind of time. So talk about some of those initial experiences at the state that have paved your way into the work that we see from you today.
I tell you what is amazing. I worked at the state newspaper making very little money, $35 an assignment, photographing the home gardens and the real estate. And I just worked my way up. I did that kind of stuff for about 5 or 6 years, and they would never give me a job at the newspaper because I didn't have a degree in photography. Everyone else had a degree. One year I won more awards than any of the staff photographers won. And then they started looking at me more seriously. And this gentleman named Al Anderson, who actually went on to be one of President Barack Obama's photo editors at the White House, he's the gentleman that hired me on full time. And I could go to Al, I could go to Chuck, and I could say, hey, I see this story over here. I want to go explore it. I had to shoot the football games. I had to shoot the politics. I had to shoot all the normal stuff that a journalist does. But I would go off on my own time and shoot these projects. And they wouldn't pay me overtime, but they would pay me with paid time off. So if I went and spent 10 hours on the peach farm, I could come back and get 10 hours off. So I did most of that work on my own time. But I just really fell in love with getting to know people. There's a photographer named Eugene Richards that was really well known for getting really close to people and spending a lot of time with them. And that had a huge influence on me.
You've primarily, not exclusively, but primarily photographed communities of color. Am I correct in saying that?
I'd say underrepresented communities, for the most part, communities of color, whether it's Latin or Black, but I also spent time with white folks who were incarcerated. 2 different gentlemen that were in 2 different prisons. So my goal has always just been to use photography to show stories that we haven't normally seen, and a lot of times in a different light. So when I spent 2 years at Titan Farms, the largest peach farm on the East Coast, of course I got pictures of people working in the field and working in the pack house, but really the best photos, the most intimate photos, were I was with people in their bedrooms, early in the morning, late at night. I would live at the camp house with the folks. But yeah, predominantly people of color.
You just said you lived where they lived.
Yeah.
And which I think is probably a key, is probably part of the answer to what I was just going to ask you. In how do you earn the acceptance and trust of these people who you're not sharing their profession. You don't do the work they're doing. You're not necessarily a member of their churches. You're not incarcerated. So how do you break that barrier and get a willingness of vulnerability that your subjects have to acknowledge and accept that this vulnerability to these eyes and this lens that is not part of their community? What's been the key for you to be able to be welcomed into these spaces? And I want you to answer that in the context of this isn't just traditional documentary photography. A lot of documentary photography, it's fly-on-the-wall photography. It's in public spaces or man on the street, landscape sort of thing. You're going into these spaces that you need permission to go into. Not exclusively, but you're doing a lot of that. Talk about your initial forays into earning that trust and how that has threaded your work throughout your career.
That's a good question, and that really is something that's very important to me. Really, I'll tell you the truth, it goes back to my father. My dad died when I was a teenager, and my dad taught me, he said, manners will take you where money won't. And he told me that when I was about 7 years old. And that has stood with me my whole life. So really, it might sound cliche, but treating people the way you want to be treated. If someone wants to come into my home and photograph me, they better have some manners. They better treat my space with respect. They need to have an attitude of giving rather than just taking. So I listen. I spend a lot of time. I pay a lot of attention to body language. We speak through body language way more than we do with words. And that's a universal thing. You can pay attention regardless of the culture, what's going on with this person's body language. I ask a lot of questions. I take the lowest seat. I'll sit on the floor. I'm not trying to take the high seat. And I help. If I go to someone's house and they're in the middle of chopping some wood, hey man, can I help you move this wood? When I was with the peach farmers, I wasn't picking the peaches, but I was out in the fields with them all day long, sleeping. When you're sleeping in the same space and eating the same food, I've eaten a lot of things that, not in that situation, but that didn't taste good, and drank things that, but if someone offers you a gift, you accept it. So there's a whole psychology behind it, and really going back to treat others as you want them to treat you. If I can read someone's body language, I can tell they don't want their photograph made, then I'm not making their photograph. That's the thing. When I was a photojournalist, I shot after triple homicides happened. I photographed terrible things. The people didn't want to be photographed, but I had to come back with pictures. And the beautiful thing about doing this type of work is that I'm in control. I don't have an editor telling me what I can and can't do. It's between me and the people that let me in. So yeah, treating people with respect, and then spending a lot of time coming back, not just being a lot of times as a photojournalist, you just hop in somewhere, shoot something. Like when the flood happened here. All these people came in, they started shooting. How many of them ever came back? Some did, I'm sure, but most, they just come to get what they want, and then they're done.
Yeah, you've talked about spending months, even years, with some of these communities, coming in and out of these communities. And I imagine you have to have a deep patience as a photographer too in doing the work you're doing, because while people might invite you in or welcome you in, it's another for them to let their guard down when your lens is close. And you have a variety of vantages in your work. Sometimes it's from a real distance where they may not really be aware that you have your camera up at that moment. And other times you're a foot or two away. It's clear you're not zooming in. You're right there. You can see the pores on people's faces. How do your subjects let their guard down enough to be themselves in moments like that, in this open vulnerability that they've probably never encountered before?
Well, that's a good question. Some people are natural at it. Some people, you can start photographing them and they'll forget that you're there and do great. Other people, it takes more time, and there's a little bit of a dance that happens. I do shoot very close, but sometimes I back up. A lot of times I will start from further away and then work my way in, almost like a hunter getting closer, right? And it's not like I'm like there, my subject is my prey or something, just kind of being very cautious, very aware of your movements. I pay a lot of attention to the clothes I wear and how I carry myself. Eugene Richards would say that he wanted to be close enough to touch his subject when he was photographing them. So sometimes when that was going through the back of my mind, can I touch this person? I was in New York City yesterday, for example, and I'm walking around in the East Village, and I see these young folks playing some music. Well, a lot of photographers would just walk by, maybe try and sneak a photo or two, or maybe just come by and take one or two photos and then keep walking. But instead, I sat down, introduced myself, talked to them for about 25, 30 minutes, learned about them, learned about their stories, and then I asked if I could photograph them, and they said, yeah. So by that time, they were so comfortable with me, I was able to be 2 feet away. So it's like, sometimes you can build that trust real quick. I think people can hear it in the tone of my voice, making eye contact. My buddy was with me, and he was shooting too, and he's the kind of guy that stand back and kind of sneak photos here and there, and I was like, I'm much more comfortable going straight up to someone, tell them what I'm doing. And if they say, no, I don't want my picture made, then it's like, all right, cool.
Especially in this era, I would think it's probably more challenging in this era of social media and gotcha videos that live on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube and other places, other spaces that have made your work probably more challenging because everybody has a camera now in their pocket and people are just shooting things that they hope will go viral because they're spectacle. Have you found that introducing yourself and doing the work you're doing today is more challenging than it was even 5 or 10 years ago?
In some ways it is, because people are like, what are you going to do with this? Are you going to, da. And that's what these folks asked me yesterday. And I said, look, if I get a really nice photo, maybe it will go on Instagram, but I don't know. And I said, really, the odds of me getting something good enough in a little bit of time is really probably not going to happen. But I'll say, here's my card, here's my Instagram, I'll send you some photos. But in some ways it's helped because the younger generation is really used to being photographed because they've been photographed ever since they were born. So putting a camera in front of them, they're very comfortable. So yeah, it helps and it hurts. It just depends on the person.
Yeah, Affrilachia, this is your first hardcover book, your first book.
It is.
That's really amazing considering the deep bodies of work that you've previously produced. Why did it take till now to produce a book of your work?
That's a good question. There's a guy named Chuck Dye that's been my mentor for 25 years. And we looked at different projects that I've done in the past. And is this enough? And we're like photo book guys. There's some people that would do a photo book with 20 pictures, and that's great. And there's some amazing artists that do photo books with very limited number of images. But for me personally, I want it to have at least 50 strong photos, if not 100. Affrilachia Testimonies has about 120 of my photographs, and then vernacular photos I collected from people. But it was just having something of substance. There's so many books in the world. You really have to ask yourself, why am I putting this out there? Why are we going to waste more paper and more ink to put something out there that no one's going to read? So Testimonies, though, really felt like it needed to be out there because there's plenty of scholars and poets that have come before me and that are doing great work and that have written books. But as far as a photographer that has gone deep into communities and solely shown what life is like in the Black communities, this is the first photography book to ever do that.
Which you told me that the other day, and I was stunned to hear that because there's been some fantastic photography of Southern communities before. Why this is not manifested in a book previously is really interesting to me. I want to talk about how you drew the book out. There's a lot of ways you could have framed it. You could have gone town by town, state by state, theme by theme, religion or fishing or whatever it was. But you really jump around geographically, and I can't figure out why you've laid out the book as you have. And by the way, the book is interstitched with poetry, other writings, your observations, and you'll go from Georgia to Sylva, North Carolina, to Jonesboro, Tennessee, and back again, and all these different communities. Why did you do it that way?
Yes, a great question. So when Chuck and I got together to lay everything out, yes, there's poetry by Kelly Elaine Navies. There's historical essays by Dr. Maya Serdam. There's oral histories from the elders that I interviewed, and then my narrations. And so we laid out all the photos on 3 or 4 tables. It took us about 3 nights, staying up till 4 in the morning. And we would just have a little piece of paper that would have the title of this poem or the title of this essay. And I'm a musician. My buddy Chuck is a musician. And a lot of folks look at photography, whether it's a gallery show like we have in here or a book, as a song. You want to have a rhythm. This book, first and foremost, is a photography book. Now, it has a little bit more text and a lot more history than in the most common photo books, which is straight photos. So if you look at the book, there's about 10 or 12 photos before you even get to the introduction. And that's because when Chuck and I were talking, he said, man, let's put the guitar solo at the beginning of the book. Everyone puts the guitar solo at the end. Let's hit them hard. Let's let them know this is a photography book. So if you look at the beginning of the book, like I said, there's about a dozen photos, and it introduces places. It introduces characters.
You also have a map.
And then, yes, Meredith Schaefer made this map for me, listing every space that I photographed, every community from Georgia through North Carolina to Tennessee. And so first we laid it out. All right, here's our guitar solo. And then there's the intro. And then we wanted to honor the elders. We wanted to honor the ancestors of folks that came before us. So I had collected these historical photographs from people's homes. Then we laid those out to honor those people. And if you notice, every photo has the person's name and where they're from.
Yeah.
And that was out of respect. This book is so much about representation and respect and dignity. And I feel like Appalachians as a whole, regardless of race, have been depicted in photography books as being poor and stupid and backwoods and all these things. And black folks, of course, have been shown in all kinds of negative ways, right? So I just want to go completely against the grain on that. But as far as laying it out, if you notice, there is a little bit of order. You just have to really pay attention. There's a black and white landscape between different sections. And when you see that black and white landscape...
I've noticed those landscapes. That's your dividers?
Those are my dividers.
Okay.
And then we did, when Maya wrote an essay, we put a few photos to give you some context. But we really I wanted people to not just have a straight narration. To me, a straight narration is just really boring, like a story that's just beginning, middle, and end. Like, how much cooler is it when you watch a movie and there's a flashback where it starts with the end? You can think about so many amazing directors that do that. So that's what we were thinking. We really wanted this to be an art piece. And someone even told me, the publisher said, this is a historical artifact steeped in artistic blah, blah, blah.
You mentioned there's 110 photos in this book, right?
There's more than 110. I think I personally have about 120 photos that I made. And then there are about 15 historical photographs.
Out of how many photos did you sift through to come through your 120 plus? Like 10,000?
I started this project in 16. We started laying it out in 21, 22. I made the last photos in 22. So, yeah, at least 10,000.
That's crazy. And I'm amazed you were able to do that in 3 or 4 nights as you described the process. Some of these photos are just one-offs and observational. Others you really steeped in and spent time with certain people. And I want to talk about that a little bit. There's William Tank Howard, this gentleman in Silva you spent some time with. Why him? What was it about his story visually and otherwise that drew you?
When I started Testimonies, the first day I started shooting, Easter Sunday 2016, I met this woman named May Louise Allen. And I was supposed to come back in a month and do an interview with her and spend time with her. And she died 3 weeks later. And then I found out that, oh yeah, people are dying all the time and entire communities are disappearing. So next time I went to the mountains, my whole goal was I've got to interview the elders. I've got to spend time with the elders before they die. So Tank was one of the elders in that community. And Tank was also a musician. I was trying to find people that were holding on to some of the old-time traditions, which was really hard to find. Like people playing music and people growing crops and people making things.
Did he play music for you?
He did play music for me. And I have some photos of him playing his guitar and doing all those different things. But Tank has got a little bit of memory loss. And he was forgetting some of the chords. And it just didn't sound as good as it probably did when he was younger.
Yeah, of course. Did you record any of that?
Oh, I have everything recorded. I have archives and archives of recordings. And there's an oral history in the book of Tank talking about walking through the woods and a panther jumping out of a tree and knocking him down. So yeah, Tank was one of the elders. One
of the stories I think really typifies or epitomizes what you bring to these projects and the welcoming that people bring to you. You were invited by the son of Reverend Billy Joe Jenkins to come to Andrews to photograph his funeral. I thought that was really fascinating that you, again, white appearing, you obviously had elicited such deep trust with this family that they invited you to shoot his funeral. Has that happened to you before? Or had that kind of invitation happen to you? And I don't know, how did you process that and then come to that assignment?
Yeah. that has funerals photographed. Maybe not hiring a photographer, but a lot of times people take pictures by the casket with their loved ones. It's a very common thing. I had met Reverend Jenkins in Andrews, North Carolina. And then I had met his grandson in White County, Georgia. And then I met his son in Georgia. And I just kind of became part of the family. And as far as my skin tone, several of the Jenkins men are married to white women. Many of their children are biracial. And that's another thing I found in almost every black community I photographed in. There's a lot of biracial marriages and a lot of biracial children. So it's really common because the black communities are so small. Like when I tell people that I'm mixed or biracial, immediate, oh yeah, you look like my son, you look like my cousin. It was kind of like that.
Also, I would think because of that observation that you've made, that it's easy for me and others on the outside to say, this is a barrier for you, to assume it's a barrier. You're saying it's a lot more common than people realize, and that at least from inside those communities, they don't put up the barriers that we might assume they put up.
That's exactly right. Think about it. Black folks have been in these mountains for hundreds of years, but have been in the minority, right? A very small percentage of the population. So getting along well with their white neighbors is also part of that culture. It's not like there's such a big black culture that folks don't have to deal with white folks. It's not that at all. So white folks and black folks in the mountains have been getting along really well for a long time. But at the same time, there's plenty of stories of people not getting along.
Well, obviously, that's the history.
There's always ignorant people, but there have been good white folks in these mountains for as long as there have been bad white folks in these mountains.
You spent a lot of time in what I didn't know about this community, the Texana community of Murphy. Where did this community and others get its name? Was it church-centered? How did Texana come to Murphy?
Texana got its name from a young lady named Texas McClellan. And there's an essay in the book about it. Maya and I went through a lot of oral histories and did some oral histories in the Texana community. And there's a woman named Lakeisha Blunt, and Texana is one of her ancestors. And the way that the story was told to us is that the McClellans were a mixed race of people in the late 1800s that were Black, Cherokee, and Irish. They were living on Cherokee land, and they were being pushed off of the land. And according to Lakeisha, it was from racial tension that the Cherokee were being pressured by the whites to disassociate themselves with black folks and mixed race folks. So they sent out their 16-year-old daughter, Texas McClellan, to go scout a new location for the family to go to. They found this mountaintop outside of Murphy, North Carolina, and one by one, people started moving there, and it became the largest black community in western North Carolina outside of Asheville. They had 3 grocery stores. They had a mortician. People traded crops and livestock. And so that particular community was named after this young lady, Texas McClellan.
I would imagine, given that it's in the hollers of North Carolina, though, was it deeply segregated? Was the population of Texana not accepted? And was it not integrated at all into Murphy proper?
The way I understand it is that a lot of people came down off of the mountain to work in Murphy, doing the only jobs that were available at the time, housekeeping and hard labor and different things like that. But the way that was told to me is that during the Jim Crow era, that the folks in the Texana community didn't have to rely on white folks as much. They had everything that they needed to survive for the most part. Of course, sugar and coffee and things like that you'd have to go to town for. And there's other communities that I've heard about like that. They would call them freedom colonies, these different communities that sprung up after emancipation.
Have you found that in the work that you did in all these different pockets, is there still black community life in those pockets? Or do you find that you were photographing in real time as these communities are evaporating?
Both. I've seen communities evaporate and the land be bought up. We all know this is coveted land. Regardless of what race you are, if your family's owned land here for a long time, there's plenty of people that want to buy it from you. So it's both. There are black communities that have disappeared that I've seen in this very short period of time. I've been working on this for 10 years. And there's other black communities that are getting larger. For example, Charleston, West Virginia, which is more of an urban space, has a really strong black community, and more black folks are moving there. But for the most part, the communities are getting smaller. What I've seen in my experience is that there's a family and they have however many children. And then when the parents die, the children get the land. But many of the children have moved away for better jobs, better education, all those different things, right? Because regardless of your race, it's hard to find work in these mountains. Then those people don't live here anymore. They're not tied to the land. So then they sell that land. So this family had 50 acres of land, and they had 5 kids, and each kid got 10 acres, and then slowly they just sell it off. Back in the day, there were plenty of stories of people having their land taken from them, like corruption, like terrible corruption, and the black folks couldn't go to the white police to help them or justice system because it wasn't there to help them. But now what I'm seeing happening in the black communities is the same thing that I'm seeing happen in some of the poorer white communities, that times are tough and people have moved away, and when granddaddy and grandmama die, we're going to sell that land.
Yeah. You won a Guggenheim Fellowship this year, which is amazing. It's very difficult and competitive fellowship. And what are you doing with that fellowship, at least in a creative, artistic, professional sense? Is there anything that the fellowship has opened up for you that you're taking on?
Well, first of all, so with the fellowship, what I pitched to Guggenheim, and I've been trying for 10 years to get this Guggenheim, so I tried 5 times in 10 years, finally got it. I am expanding this work. This work covers Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee. I'm expanding into West Virginia. I'm expanding into South Carolina and Alabama. So geographically, telling more stories like the story of Texana. And I'm also focusing on the younger generation. I'm spending time with the elders and going to collect those histories as well. But the younger generation, and by younger, kind of like between 20 and 50, that's a section that I really didn't photograph a lot on this first book. And the first book was heavily steeped in the church, because I would normally start at the church when I went into a new community. So in the first book, there isn't anything that represents the gay or queer communities or anyone that identifies as non-straight. And so this next book, I think, in showing the younger generation, that's happening as well. So just kind of trying to round off the edges and show a more diverse look at Appalachia.
You mentioned that you had tried 5 times applying for the Guggenheim before you landed a Guggenheim Fellowship. And I thought that also was really symbolic of how you've waged your career, that very persistent and working it. You're not just doing this kind of work, or at least up to this point, you've done a lot of commercial work to pay the bills. How have you threaded or wedded together that kind of photography and that kind of career and hustling to build a freelance career while giving yourself the time necessary to do this kind of work?
I used to think I was going to call my website the Aluka Hustle, because I tell you what, man, when I was a kid, my parents split up and single mom, we were on welfare and all that stuff, man, I would go to the grocery store and buy soda, like the 25-cent sodas, and take them to school and sell them. I would get cigarettes and chewing tobacco and take it to school and sell it out of the back of my book bag. And then when I started freelancing at the newspaper, at the state newspaper, I freelanced for so many years. I was freelancing. I was working as a waiter at a comedy club. I was working as a part-time mortgage consultant, and I was assembling gym furniture and being a stagehand. And then when I got staff on the newspaper for that 7-8 years I was on staff, that's the only time in my life where I just had a paycheck and someone paid me. It's also, I made the least amount of money I'd ever made just doing this one thing. And then when the newspapers crumbled and everyone got laid off, I moved to Atlanta. And once again, there I was freelancing. I was a photo editor at CNN. I was working for New York Times and Wall Street Journal and Chicago Tribune and LA Times and all this stuff. And then I started doing corporate work. There was this quote by this famous photographer named Joe McNally. And he said something like, "You've got to swallow hard. Go make yourself some living, some money so you can eat. Then go feed your soul." And he said, freelance is like a patchwork quilt, but you can do it. And that was on my office desk for the longest time. You can do it. And it was just like, man, I always felt like I got to go do this BS so I can do what I care about. Because, yeah, I've done corporate events for, just the other day I was photographing the president of Delta, and a few months ago I was photographing Jeff Bezos, and then before that I was photographing Kevin Hart and Shaquille O'Neal. But then yesterday I was photographing a little wedding over in Tennessee. And I was telling you last week, my biggest money maker is I do Santa Claus photography at a country club down in Atlanta. So swallowing your pride, look, man, if the job pays, I'll do it. I have a camera, I will work. And now Affrilachia Testimonies, Affrilachia Generation, some of the other photo projects, that's where my heart is. That's what I love. I was in New York City, like I said yesterday, because this book is in an exhibit at the International Center of Photography. What's funny is, man, you see all these photographers or artists and they post all these things and you think, oh, that's their life. That's how they're paying their bills. Most people are doing all this other stuff so they can put food on the table, man. And yeah, people think I'm making money off of this book. No, I make about $2 when the book sells for $50. I make about $2. But yeah, hustling, brother, and just try and keep going, you know.
Well, we'll be looking for the Aluka hustle well into the rest of the year in 2027. Thanks so much for all your time, Aluka, and I look forward to all your work that you have coming forward.
Man, thanks for having me, and awesome. I look forward to listening to more of your podcasts.
Thanks so much, man.
Yeah.
Thanks so much to Chris Aluka Berry for today's conversation and for this amazing body of work. Some of the Affrilachia Testimonies exhibition is on view now through July at the Madison County Arts Council building in downtown Marshall. And you can check out a broader spectrum of his work at alukastorytellingphotography.com. And this podcast is part of the soft launch for See Here, my new journalism platform for Western North Carolina. There'll be video, audio, written stories, and you can subscribe for free to catch it all at seeherewnc.com. Till the next time I see you here, I'm Matt Peiken.